Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the April additional meeting of Mansfield Shire Council. Good evening, officers and fellow councillors and members of the public who have joined us here tonight. I'll now start by I'll call on each councillor and ask them to confirm verbally that they can see all councillors and hear the proceedings. Councillor Holcomb.
I can hear the proceedings and see all councillors and council officers.
Thanks, Councillor Holcomb. Councillor Raby.
I can see all council officers and councillors and hear the proceedings.
Councillor Sladden.
I can see all my fellow councillors and council officers and can see and hear the proceedings. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Sladden. I'll now ask each councillor to confirm by raising their hand that they could all hear each other's statements. Councillor Raby, Councillor Holcomb, Councillor Sladden. Thank you. Madam CEO, do we have any apologies this evening?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Webb is an apology for tonight's meeting. He is unwell.
Thanks, Madam CEO. I will now read the statement and call on each councillor to confirm their commitment. As councillors of the Mansfield Shire, we are committed to ensuring our behaviour meets the standards set by the Mansfield Shire Councillor Code of Conduct and Councillor Charter. We will, at all times, faithfully represent and uphold the trust placed in us by the community. Councillor Holcomb.
I confirm my commitment.
Councillor Raby.
I confirm my commitment.
Councillor Sladden.
I confirm my commitment.
Thanks, councillors. I'll now call on the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Holcomb, to recite council's acknowledgement of country.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Our meeting is being held on the lands of the Taungurung people and we wish to acknowledge them as traditional owners. We would also like to pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here today.
Thanks, Councillor Holcomb. I'll now call on each councillor and ask them to declare any conflict of interest they may have in relation to tonight's agenda. Councillor Holcomb.
I have no conflict in relation to any agenda items.
Councillor Raby.
I have no conflict in relation to any agenda items tonight.
And Councillor Sladden.
I have no conflict of interest in any items on this agenda.
Thanks, councillors. Councillor, I'd now like to call for a motion in relation to a change in order of tonight's business. Councillor Sladden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to put the recommendation that we change the order of business in relation to items 7.1 and 7.2, and that we move the revenue and rating plan to be discussed first prior to the budget.
Thanks, Councillor Sladden. Can I have a seconder to that motion? Councillor Raby. Thanks, Councillor Raby. I'll now put that motion to a vote. All those in favour? Against, the motion is carried. So we move on to the first agenda item of the night, which is item 7.1.1, the Animal Welfare Grant Program. The responsible officer is Grants Officer Emma McPherson. Is Emma joining us tonight? No.
No, Mr. Mayor, I'll take any questions on that item.
Thanks, Ms. Alexander. Councillors, do we have any questions or queries in relation to that agenda item?
No.
No? Okay. In that case, can I have a motion in relation to that item? Councillor Holcomb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I would like to move the motion that I just lost my motion. The council support the Animal Welfare Program application for desexing cats and dogs for eligible participants by waiving the initial registration fee for each pet owned by a concession card holder referred to the program by local emergency relief providers or council's family integration unit for a maximum number of 100 animals.
Thanks, Councillor Holcomb. Can I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Raby. Councillor Holcomb, would you like to speak to that motion?
No, I have nothing further to add to the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Raby.
No, thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Any other councillor?
No.
No. In that case, I'll put the motion to vote. All those in favour? Motion is carried. So we now move to item 17.2.2, which is the Revenue and Rating Plan 2021-25 review. Responsible officer is the Manager of Business and Performance, Anthony Smith. Councillors, do we have any questions or comments in relation? Sorry, we do have any questions or comments in relation to that item?
Just a point of order, Mr. Mayor, that it's 7.2.2, not 17.2.2. You just made a little boo-boo there.
Thanks, Councillor Raby.
And to further clarify, given we changed the order of business, it's 7.2.1.
Thanks, Councillor Sladen. You're very correct. Yeah. Okay. So is there any questions, inquiries that are of importance to this this agenda item? No? Well, councillors, can I have a motion in relation to this item? Councillor Sladen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation is that Council endorses for release the revised Revenue and Rating Plan 2021 to 2025 for community consultation from the 28th of April 2022 until the 26th of May 2022. That it gives public notice of the preparation of the revised Revenue and Rating Plan 21 to 25 in a locally distributed newspaper and on Council's website, making it available for public inspection and seeking written submissions on the revised Revenue and Rating Plan 2021-2025, noting that any submitter may request to be heard in support of their submission. Point 3, establishes a special committee of council, if required, consisting of all councillors for the purpose of hearing submissions in relation to the revised Revenue and Rating Plan 2021 to 2025 on Tuesday, the 7th of June, 2022. And finally, that notes the revised Revenue and Rating Plan 2021 to 2025 with consideration of the community engagement outcomes will be considered for adoption at the ordinary council meeting to be held on Tuesday, the 28th of June, 2022.
Thanks, Councillor Sladen. Seconded to that motion, Councillor Raby. Councillor Sladen, would you like to speak to that motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is the policy document of council, which sets out, hence the title, Revenue and Rating Plan for the next 4 years. It does have a look at the valuations and the differentials. The final certified valuations will come to council at the end of April, early May. And if there are any changes to the differentials, these will be incorporated into the final version of the plan, which will be up for adoption on the 28th of June. However, it's not expected that any significant changes will be required. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Sladen. Councillor Raby has seconded. You wish to speak to the motion?
I think Councillor Sladen's covered everything I wanted to say. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Raby. Any other councillors like to speak to the motion? Councillor Holcomb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'd like to speak to it with relevance to this year, last year, and to this year's budget. Last year, we, as a Shire, experienced an increase in the CIV values of property throughout the Shire by 12.3%. And in that, one of the segments there of farmland suffered what was called rate shock, in that the rating CIV values of farmland went up by 23.2%. And we adopted the rating principle there of an equitable distribution of the rate burden. And that set the framework for this year's rating plan and policy that's been enacted through the budget. This year, our valuations, CIV valuations this Shire went up by 36.4%. We were, as far as I'm aware, we were the highest. We've had the highest increase in valuations of any Shire in Victoria. So we are in unprecedented, and I know it's a very commonly used word these days, unprecedented times in terms of how we manage the rate increases going forward within a rating maximum of 1.75%. Within the increase in valuations, we've had some extraordinary valuations. Residential, for example, went up by 45%. Rural residential valuations went up by 35.7%. So these are significant. But what we've tried to do through this rating plan that we're presenting this evening is maintain the equitable distribution of rates across all sectors at the same level as it was in this current year's budget. Except overall, we're getting a 1.75% increase. Last year, as people might remember, we had a 0% increase in rates. So with that, having said that, I'm really pleased with how this has turned out. We've managed that equitable distribution of the rate burden in line with what it was last year, and thus mitigated the effects of rate shock, which have affected a number of segments of our Shire. And so I'd like to acknowledge the work done by Mr. Smith, Manager of Business and Performance, in coming to these numbers and presenting this policy tonight. So thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Holcomb, and very well said. I would also like to endorse your comments and also thank the Manager of Business and Performance, Mr. Smith, for the work that he's done in that area. It's really good. So thank you. All right. So there'll be no more speakers. In that case, I'll put the item 7.2.1 so to the vote. All those in favour of the motion? Motion is carried. And now turn to item 7.2.1, which is the proposed budget. 7.2.2, which is the proposed budget. The responsible officer is the Manager of Business Performance, Anthony Smith. Anthony, is there anything you'd like to add before we discuss this motion, this agenda item?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's just one thing I'd like to point out, that in the council report, under the key indicators for 22-23, just want to make a correction. It is referred to there as an underlying deficit of $500,000. I just want to correct that to say that there is actually an underlying surplus of $24,000.
Thanks very much, Mr. Smith. That's a good correction to have. Councillors, do we have any queries or comments in relation to the budget? Okay, can I have a motion in relation to tonight's agenda item? Councillor Holcomb.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'd like to propose the motion that Council 1 endorses the release of the proposed budget 22-23 for community consultation from the 28th of April 2022 until 26th of May 2022, with the amendment that any reference in relation to the Resource Recovery Master Plan be removed. Point 2, that the council gives public notice seeking written submissions on the proposed budget 22-23 in a locally distributed newspaper and on council's website, making it available for public inspection and seeking written submissions on the proposed budget 22-23, noting that any submitter may request to be heard in support of their submission. Point 3, that council endorses and establishes an additional meeting of council, if required, consisting of all councillors for the purpose of hearing submissions in relation to the proposed budget 22-23 on Tuesday, the 7th of June, 2022. And fourthly, that council notes that the adoption of the proposed budget 22-23 with consideration of the community engagement outcomes will be considered for adoption at the council meeting to be held Tuesday, 28th of June, 2022. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Holcomb. Could I have a seconder to that motion? Councillor Raby. Thanks, Councillor Raby. Councillor Holcomb, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, I do. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think this is a really good budget. It's a very solid budget, and it continues on the work that was done in the current year with a similar flavour, with a couple of minor exceptions. This year, our budget has a 0% increase. For the budget that we're proposing, we are proposing to have a 1.75% rate increase, which is in line with the state government's rate cap. The proposed budget provides a total operating expenditure of almost $20 million and a capital works program of close to $11 million. I think last year, from memory, the capital works the current year, our capital works program was the highest that we've ever had, and this year supersedes that again. So it shows the investment that this council is making into capital infrastructure around our shire. The budget has an underlying operating surplus of $24,000, which is a pleasing result. We're renewing assets at a greater rate than our depreciation, and on asset renewal, we're proposing to spend $5.5 million. We're also proposing to spend $2.4 million on new assets and upgrading current assets to just under $3 million. For the third year in a row, which I know is very pleasing to councillors, is that we're going to offer the opportunities for our small towns to apply to the Outlying Communities Infrastructure Fund, allocating $50,000 again to this fund this year. Last year, this grant was oversubscribed, and we want to provide the opportunity for those with worthwhile community infrastructure projects to have another chance to apply for funds. And the other thing that I'm really pleased about this budget is that the key performance indicators that we look at from a council, which are at the back of the documents that's available to the public, we very comfortably meet those indicators. And certainly from an individual council, that gives me a great deal of comfort. And for that, I'd like to acknowledge the work done by the executive and particularly Mr. Smith again, who's been driving the budget. Thank you all for your work in that area. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Holcomb. Councillor Raby is seconded to the motion. Would you wish to speak to the motion?
Yeah, I would. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'll start off by thanking Manager of Business and Performance, Mr. Smith, our GM Community and Corporate Services, Dina, and also GM Infrastructure and Planning, Ms. Alexander, because what I'm going to speak about now is basically what these guys have put together over the course of the last 6 months, this budget. We've experienced an incredible growth in Mansfield of 3.3%. We're looking at on top of that, another 2.2% next year, which is putting a lot of stress on our parks and gardens, our roadways, our drainage. With respect to Kirsten Alexander and her team what I call engineering. They've done a great job on looking at and working out a plan for asset renewal, especially for stormwater. Stormwater in Mansfield's always been a big issue, and this council have met this head on. There's been a problem, we're fixing it. In fact, we're spending $870,000 on the corner of Apollo Street to fix this legacy issue. It's great. It's a great outcome for us, but we also have to spend some money on a couple of offices for parks and gardens. And I think the community will understand that, and the community love our parks and gardens. We all love them. The roundabout, you know, it's beautiful, Mansfield. So also another thing that we've done in this budget, we bought the car park. It was a big cost to us, and we are looking at moving on with that land that we've bought to develop that into a car park. There are a lot of stresses and strains on us. However, we've created a budget with a surplus, which is outstanding to all the councillors, my fellow councillors, and the team at the council. I'd just like to say in closing, Mr. Mayor, that this budget's a great budget. It's outstanding. I'm so happy with it, and it's going to fix up those issues that we have with roads, with our stormwater, and with the growth of our town. We have to look at having a way to recover some of these costs on roads and drainage. So thanks very much, everybody, and I'm astounded that this is one of the best budgets I've seen. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Rabi. Any other councillors like to speak to the motion? Councillor Sladden.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'd like to speak to the motion. Has been alluded to previously by councillors Holcomb and Rabi. Everybody knows that our population growth is 3.3% and expected to be above 2.5% year on year going forward. Obviously, this is putting a lot of pressure on infrastructure. So this budget does address those infrastructure needs, but also it addresses the personnel required to carry out the necessary business of coping with this additional growth. And so 3 new positions are required. One's in parks and gardens to help maintain our open space and continue to ensure that all of the towns in the Shire are well maintained and attractive. There's also a new position for in roads maintenance to service the extra lengths of roads from the new subdivisions that are coming as a result of the growth. And also a community connections officer will be added at a 0.5, which enables us to provide the necessary planning and advocacy in aged care, youth and early years education. There will also be additional staffing to be provided at the Resource Recovery Centre to provide a better service for our ratepayers. And if I may, Mr. Mayor, I'll just touch on planning. Planning has been an issue previously, but we've had a very successful 21-22 financial year in the strategic planning area, and we will be continuing to invest in strategic planning. As a result of that investment, the Mansfield planning strategy that has been developed this financial year, 21-22, it will be progressed to be incorporated into the Mansfield planning scheme. We will be working with the outlying towns across the municipality to prepare localised plans for those towns, and also in conjunction with the Goulburn Broken Catchment Management Authority, we'll be looking to undertake a flood study of the tributaries to Ford Creek. Obviously, floods have been a major issue in our northern states, but we are preparing for those with this flood study. And as Councillor Ravi mentioned, the 870,000 on drainage for Apollo and High Street, but that 870,000 is only part of $1.5 million that will be looking at our drains within the Mansfield Township. So yes, I certainly support this budget. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Sladden. And if I could just chip in at the end and back up and acknowledge everything my fellow councillors have said. One thing that people will notice in this budget, though, is that we've had to have a significant increase in the waste charges. Council charges fees to recover the costs of waste service provided to residents, and the proposed budget sees a 51% increase in the waste fee charged to households. The average ratepayer currently pays about $340, and this will increase to approximately about $490. The cost is comparable to all our neighbouring shires, so we have probably been on the lighter end in charging of waste in the last 2 or 3 years. So this charge will reflect the increased costs of providing waste services and will pay down the existing deficit. And this includes an increase in EPA charges and increased fees at the Benalla landfill, which are totally out of our hands. I think the EPA charge was something in the area of 61% last year. We are going to provide, on top of that though, 53 new permanent public bins around the Shire, and we will also provide additional staff and resourcing at the Resource Recovery Centre so that we can keep up with the demand of the influx of people into the Shire. Unfortunately, with tourism, you get increased levels of waste coming into the Shire, which we have to deal with. So that's something that that will be in this budget. Just on a few other capital works, as Councillor Ravi mentioned, we purchased the car park in High Street recently, and we will borrow $600,000 to make 100 car parking spaces in the main street of Mansfield, which is something that Council has been looking at doing for a long, long time. So we were very fortunate to be able to purchase the old Caltex service station site and to be able to do this to provide for future generations to come. We will also continue on with stage 2 of the heavy vehicle bypass. So stage 1 is currently underway and progressing well, but stage 2, which will go from Dead Horse Lane, the Tolmy Road, Mount Battery Road, and down to the Buller Road, will kick off next year. So that's also in our long-term plan, is to get heavy vehicles out of the centre of town to protect the people and amenities in the main streets. The budget also has an allocation in it for a stretch of 1.25 kilometres of footpath along Malcolm Street, which has also been asked for the last 20 years. So we're really pleased to be able to provide that footpath on the south side of Malcolm Street right up to Kidston Parade. So we'll give really good access for people getting into town from out of that neck of the woods. We're also looking at continuing on or kicking off the station precinct master plan, which will get into gear this next budget year, and really looking forward to that. And also it allocates $410,000 for the open space strategy. So which, as we get new subdivisions come online to try and find housing for the youth in this Shire who want to stay here, and affordable housing, it also brings in more open space strategies, more open space into the Shire, which in turn, takes a maintenance and looking after. So, but we need to have that to continue to have good amenities and open spaces that people are used to and enjoy here. So I think that about covers everything I have to say. So having said that, I'd like to now put the budget motion to the vote. So councillors, all those in favour of this motion? The motion is passed. That's having been said, now that's the last item on the agenda tonight. So I'd like to thank all councillors and council officers for their attendance tonight. I'd also like to thank all the members of the public who have tuned in, and I look forward to this budget going out to the public for consultation and for any submissions that will come back in the next month. So thank you for your attendance tonight, and good night.
Good night.
Good night.